These are 3 part leather bound albums of camp sketches done at the end of the 19th century, and the sketches were actually photographed and then stuck into the album, and they're all of the 5th Cheshire Rifle Volunteer Regiment. So let's come in a little bit closer and have a little bit of a better look at them and show you exactly what has gone on. Well, we know that there are photographs of postcards that were done, because there's a couple of loose postcards within the album. So there is a photograph of this postcard, and the back of a postcard, which was a prepaid postcard you could buy at a post office, is addressed to the commanding officer, 5th Cheshire Rifle Volunteers, Somerford Camp, Congleton. Now, the start date of these images of 1872, of these sketches, coincides with Lieutenant Colonel Sir Charles Shakeley, the commanding officer of the battalion, offering Somerford Park for the annual drill and sham fight, which seemed to take place every year in June. And it seems that the artist would do 6 or more sketches from each camp each June on these postcards and send them to the commanding officer. But before she did that, photographs were taken so that she had a record of them as well. Now, you will have noticed I keep on saying she. How do we know that the artist was a she? Well, there is one postcard at the beginning of the 3rd album. Let's just find it. Here we go. Which is titled Ye Artist's Despair. And as you can see, it shows a female artist sat at the table with presumably her husband, who was an officer in a volunteer regiment, and she's clasping at her hair, looking for inspiration. So that gives us a good indication that she was the artist, and probably visited the camp every June with her husband, who was on manoeuvres. So let's have a look through these 3 albums. Within them there's 119 sketches in all. Some of them are grouped under a theme, some of them are more individual, some of them show camp furniture, a lot of them have got humour in them, but they're well worth a look at. So let's move on to that. So the first sketch is an introduction. It's a title piece. The second one is titled First Visitor of a Camp, 1872. And that first visitor, apart from all of the rain, is a lightning bolt. And we can see dated down here in pencil, 1872. And you'll see the date in pencil on a number of them as the year changes. Second one is 5th Rifles on this side here, and 5th Rivals, the umbrellas on the other side, needed for the deluge of rain. And it seems the rain must have been so great because they put the tents up on platforms and they've got boats so they can get to them. Again, we've got tents on platforms and more boats. Then we have one titled RIP, and we don't know if that means the end of the camp washed away by rain, or possibly somebody dying because of the rain. I'd like to think that it's rest in peace to the camp. Now we move on to the next year, 1873, and we've got first visitors to the camp in 1873, and you can see a hedgehog and a couple of frogs or toads and a spider watching the parade in the background. Then we've got a night attack, a grand charge of Lepidoptera as they appear to our excited sentry. So the use of Latin there for the moth shows the education of the artist. The 7th sketch in here, Officer of the Day. The 8th picture, we've got a presentation of a testimonial with a lovely jumbo in the middle there, and soldiers all lined behind, raising their arm, cheering, because they're all giving a chorus. The whole strength of a battalion is giving a chorus of approval, for he's a jolly good fellow. Too many cooks, and we can see on the side here a soldier is bringing in 3 splendid rats. Then in the middle, the cook has got a first-rate fat kitten. But then another soldier is running in with a leg of mutton, saying, "Stop, stop, huzzah, huzzah." He's found some proper food. Next, it's showing the breaking of the camp, the dismantling of all of the tents, and a soldier looking a little bit glum. We move on to 1874 now, and we've got the officers' squad drill, and the visitors declaring, or saying, "Why, I declare, they don't drill a lot better than they did last year." Now we move on to a set of themed images that are titled Pleasures of a Camp. Pleasures of a camp, early birds and early worms. An officer is shaking his boots and worms and frogs are falling out. Pleasures of a camp. 4 a.m. An energetic barber is trying to wake a sleepy officer to see if he's ready to have a shave. 14. The adjutant's tent, and he's receiving lots of mail and postage to deal with. This image is comparing soldiers to larvae and a butterfly. So you've got a soldier in a sleeping bag looking rather like a larva before it's turned into a butterfly, and then a soldier with a cape that looks like the wings of a moth or a butterfly. Then that's the end of the camp for that year, and it says, "All's well that ends well, to our next meeting, June 1875. Now in 1875, most of these images are songs. This one is Song Hu Nad 1, 2, 3. And in 1875, most of these sketches are songs. And this one says, the song is, "Who would not fight for Charlie?" Charlie, the commanding officer. And it mentions all of the different corps from Wilmslow to Nantwich to Crewe, Macclesfield, Congleton and Sandbach, all towns in the area of Cheshire. The next song is about the ground being very cold for sleeping. We've got another song, but there's a wonderful image of a camp table with all of the officers sat around it. And here we have more songs, and all of the verses to the songs are written by the artist. They're all particular to the camp and what's going on. Now we've got a Shakespeare quote here, and it's from Henry V. "The country cocks do crow, the clocks do toll, and the third hour of drowsy morning name." And that shows an officer waking up on a camp bed early in the morning, birds flying about, rabbits and hedgehogs out, everyone a little bit drowsy because it's so early. This one shows 2 rabbits complaining about the volunteers marching and one of them catching his foot in a rabbit hole. The next one shows the volunteers retreating and the rabbits' revenge. Now we move on to 1876, and the theme for this first few postcards is the ideas of camp comfort, or comfort in camp. And this first one is the colonel enjoying a wash before the volunteers come, and they're all lined up outside the tent ready to see him. This is the adjutant wanting all of his home comforts, and of course it's perfect for us dealing in campaign furniture because it shows a tent full of furniture. You've got a chair, you've got a chest, you've got a bed, you've got a hip bath, and so on. Then the next one, you've got the lieutenant sitting on the colonel's sherry smoking while another soldier comes along requesting the sherry for the colonel. Ideas of comfort in camp, and we've got ladies and officers enjoying a jolly good lunch. Ideas of comfort in camp, a private stuffing his bedding full of straw to try and make it a little bit more comfortable. Ideas of comfort in camp, a sergeant major wanting to strike the tents quickly so that they can keep them dry rather than the men dry. Celebration because another man has joined the cause. Now we have a series of portraits of officers, and this the date has moved on another year, and these are just titled camp portraits with the officers or the subjects unnamed. This one on the card, you can see it says Bête Noire. So that's one album down. We've now moved on to the camp of 1878, and the first two sketches work as a pair, and this one shows Sir Charles charging the enemy. He's on horseback with the volunteers in front, bayonets fixed, advancing on the scrub. The second one shows the retreat of the volunteers as two bulls come charging out of the scrub, chasing the volunteers away. The next few are all a set of Proverbs. And I think what this one means is when play or dancing, then comes work. The next one shows, I'm not quite sure what it's all about, but there's a lady and a siege, and then D, and then two waiters serving a couple of ladies who are seated. So not quite sure on that one. Then we have first catch it and then serve it or cook it. Fair heart never won fair maiden, which of course is a quote from Cervantes. Pride comes before fall. That's the end of the Proverbs. And then we have a look at the issue of these rather splendid new helmets to the volunteers, and a bit of humour centred around them on the different sizes and the different things that the helmets could be used for. You can see someone drinking out of one. You can see that other soldiers are playing a game of Aunt Sally, trying to knock a helmet on a pole off with sticks. Now we move on to 1879, and we've got a group of sketches which are entitled Camp Nightmares, and this one shows some recruits taking a stroll in the park, but they're pursued by quadrupeds. This one shows a soldier dreaming about the object of his affections, gazing at him with warm countenance as he's marching past, only to wake up to the unpleasant reality of a lamb having come into his tent. The next camp nightmare is the doctor, where all of the soldiers have conspired to ask for a pill of black dose, and he's obliged to take them all and mix them into the soldiers' soup. Then we have the mess president, who is worried because he's found out that the colonel has invited 529 guests to lunch, and this is all he's got to serve them. Next camp nightmare is we've got the distressing case of untidiness in the camp. And after finding an onion in the ground in front of Captain Smith's tent, it suggested there should be a court-martial. Then we've got the waiter offering a claret cup or champagne, only for the officer, when he's asked for champagne, to be told that there isn't any champagne. Now we get brought down to earth a little bit with the next one, because it's in memorandum of two soldiers who died at the age of 27. We don't know if they died in action. It names them both, and it's dated to the cross. Now we move on a year, 1880, and it says the addled egg, or all good but one. Then we've got the clever dodge of a sub-lieutenant to avoid being late for early parade, and he set himself an alarm clock there to make sure that he gets up. Next, we have a Midsummer's Night's Dream. At 5:30 in the morning, an officer is woken, and rather groggily he asks if his bath is ready, with the gentleman sticking his head through the tent saying, "Yes, sir, I've just broken the ice." But we can see a bit of camp equipment in there. We can see the camp tent pole with lots of things hanging off it, a trunk with his helmet on, etc. So quite interesting. Next we've got soldiers lined up with a bell, and a stranger asking if a bell is a set of stocks, but the sergeant informing him that it's the camp clock. Next we've got Brigade Day. Mounted officers and steeds are scarce this year, and we can see an officer on a donkey. The next we've got the scene of a fly setting on the nose of Captain James just as the general was riding onto the parade. On this image we see an extraordinary electrical phenomenon observed in the lines of the 5th Cheshires, June 22nd, 1880, and that of course is more rain and lightning coming down onto the camp as they're rushing around trying to find shelter. And on the same day we've got a luncheon under difficulties, with umbrellas used to keep the ladies dry whilst they eat. Now we move on a year to 1881, and the next series of sketches are about spectators to the camp. And these spectators are watching the march past with extreme contempt and saying that it's all a piece of nonsense. This is an old boy who's just enjoying being allowed into the park and being able to relax and enjoy it. We've got another old gentleman who's complaining and threatening to write to the Times, presumably because he's tripped up whilst trying to watch the march past. Next we've got Edwin and Angeline, and one of them is saying, "Drat on the volunteers, I wouldn't miss the march past for anything," even though they may be on to a promise of something a little bit better. Next, we've got two locals on a picnic, with one of them saying, "Sit thee doon, lass, sit thee doon on the floor. Ee, lad, I canna sit on the floor, it's too low." "29. A new quadruped having appeared on the scene, and it's proposed to utilise him as a charger for the Colonel." Now we've got a series of quite well drawings of different types of pottery. This is Camp Pottery number 1, and it's Love's Young Dream. Then we've got Love's Young Dream Dispelled. Morning Duties, getting the water. Evening Pleasantries, having a dance. And the Thoughtful Commissary providing wheelbarrows. On to 1883. A facetious butcher onto a conscientious sub who has duly tasted most of the food, and he's asking him, "Taste of meat too, sir?" even though it's raw. Next, an officer saying to a lady, "This is our drum major," and she replying, "And I suppose this is your drum minor." A charming camp major, and what a good class of men you have. I should hardly have expected to see members of Parliament in the ranks. The aghast major, "Oh, pardon me, those are military police." Our new locomotive. The cook saying, "You see, ma'am, by the old plan we could only roast and boil. With these we can cook any road you like." Next we come on to a poem about a wily adjutant with the officers and soldiers shown as bees. Next it's titled "For Camp, June 1883. Sensible costumes recommended for officers and men." And that's the end of Book 2. Book 3, and the year is 1884, and we get to the image we showed you at the beginning. The artist's despair. The week before camp. Pathetic but useless appeal. Oh, do think of something funny. And here's a soldier making a complaint. And it's difficult to read, but it's something about somebody finding a tadpole in their coffee. Dignitaries in disguise. Be careful if you knew whose hair you were cutting. I'm the Mayor of Mudford. And you know who's cutting your hair? I'm the Mayor of Sludgesbury. So obviously it had been raining yet again, and the camp was in a bit of a state for Mudford and Sludgesbury. A poser at the luncheon. Salmon? Will you take it thick or thin? Oh, cut it fair. I'm neither voluminous nor vociferous. Within the hollow square. A chorus of distracted females are asking Mr. Grix, the officer, to take their money and spare their lives as they're trapped within the square. This next sketch shows a soldier on a toadstool, and the text underneath starts off, Ave Caesar. Moving on to 1885, a march out, undignified conduct of big drum. The blanket bag, very warm and comfortable, but awkward in case of alarm fire. Why not eat insects? And this is a series of a few on insects, with complaints over a late dinner. On this sketch, an officer is saying, "May I offer you one of these stag beetles, Colonel?" Next, we've got the Intex Revenge. You talk of eating us, but we will eat you. And here again, of course, we've got the postcard that we showed you at the beginning. And here we have a gigantic sergeant talking to a small private. The pay department, and it's interesting that the stamp on this card is photographed, so it wasn't a prepaid card, and it's dated June 22nd, 1885, with all of the pay department shown as different coins. Now, there's obviously in the news talk of a new Busby's and sealskin hats coming out, because this is a cartoon sketch of a new sealskin hat with a Busby attached, and wondering if it looked anything like this comical version. Here we can see an officer apologising to some farmers, presumably, and it's titled 3 Wise Acres and a Cow, with profuse apologies to everyone. Next, we have got history of the 5 little pigs. This little pig went to drill. This little pig stayed at home. This little pig got good rations. This little pig got none. This little pig went wee, 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 wee all the way home. And you can see a pig with helmet and uniform playing a little flute. Now we move on to 1887. And of course, on 21st of June 1887, it was Queen Victoria's 50th Jubilee. So here we have a Jubilee pie. Next we have a Jubilee pudding. And then with the soldiers all overindulging in the pudding, they're all a little bit sick, and they're running to the hospital tent. Next one, with the band. And the officer is saying, "You can't march past with that thing, man." And the soldier saying, "Sir, wherever I go, my cello goes." Next we have a fussy officer with a butcher wondering how old the meat is. Now we've got the second postcard, which remains with the album. And that shows Buffalo Bill, a sketch in camp. On to 1888 and floral decorations. Next we have the en tout cas bayonet, which is the umbrellas, and you can see that the skirmishers are using them for sun protection, whilst the sentry is using them to keep dry. Next we have camp impediments, with an officer under an umbrella on what may be a chair or a washstand perhaps, being called for dinner. Now this next card is the artist celebrating their work, their centenary, celebrating the 100th sketch done of the camp. This sketch shows ye ghost of the camp, so presumably after they had all left. And then we have Mars attending Venus. Next we have camp puzzles with soldiers carrying baggage, trying to work out which officer perhaps it belongs to. And underneath that we have got a drawing of a flower with a fairy resting in it, saying, "Where shall abracadabra dwell?" On this card we have an officer lying in his tent on his camp bed, having a nightmare after having eaten shrimps for dinner. The second card says, "He may be slow and he may be fat," etc., etc., talking about the horses as they gallop off. Next we have an officer at the flag. On the first of these two cards, the small boy is saying, "The colonel spoke to me yesterday." The officer is saying, "Oh, nonsense. What could he say to a little boy like you?" "Sir, he told me to get out of the way." Then below that, we've got the new Pandora. Presumably that's the artist again, with a box dated 1889, and it shows 18 camps flown away. This next sketch is titled Consternation, and it shows an officer being addressed by a soldier who's a little bit worried because all of the beer barrels seem to be exploding. Trepidation. I'm sure I hear someone following me. Aggravation. It's 3 a.m. and an officer's got to get up to stop his company playing football. Annihilation, and obviously there's been a sham fight. First volunteer. "Badly wounded, Jim?" Second volunteer. "Oh yes, very. And you?" First volunteer. "Oh, I'm killed." And they groan at intervals. Next, tranquilization. Early closing movement. To bed, to bed. Now we've moved off a card here onto the Endpapers. Obviously they had more cards, more sketches than the album could take. And on this final sketch we've got the wording, "Ye colonel to ye camps, goodbye my dear, we are sorry to lose you, but we wish you well whatever. Come back to us again if you can." So that's all of the sketches, and they must be a unique record of the 5th Cheshire Regiment and their manoeuvres whilst on camp at Somerford in Cheshire. The scrapes and japes that they all got up to and fun that they had. And it really is an exceptional and in places very funny record.